you all, and let's get started. So we do record the session, do a little bit of an edit next week, which will be available on Monday, Tuesday, and outshared on Wednesday. And welcome to this afternoon. It's actually number 47 this, but we're doing something new this afternoon, which we've not done before. If you've been following my post this afternoon, whilst we cover a topic of engagement every week, we're doing something a little bit different this week, because the direction of travel that we're taking it, we're actually showing up, as Seth would call it, and actually going for a 10x claim on strategy, as we will be going across the different offers. And you might say, well, how can you do that as an engagement specialist? How can you claim such a thing? Well, on a parallel track to my work over the last couple of years, I've been working on the laws of engagement, which I was delighted to find didn't exist anywhere. And what they do is they give us a framework around engagement, collaboration, and productivity. And I'm going to introduce you to those rules and to those laws. And what I would say is, if you do have a pen and paper handy, I'm going to ask you to think of an example of a conversation or meeting or workshop you may have been in the last week or two. So I'm going to ask you to actually, we won't go into a full in-depth version of the laws, but I will give you a sense of how straightforward they are to think about, and the numbers just get done by a spreadsheet behind the scenes. And what this is allowing your big pick as a business to do, and in this case today with Bryce's help, is to go after strategies, which sometimes is maybe a little bit vague and fluffy to some, i.e. strategy is a word that can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. But actually we believe firmly that by flipping it on its head, turning the organization, which is often top down, into more of a bottom up organism, where you have the colleague activated and involved in the development and implementation of that strategy, you have a number of accelerants running like a contagion through the organization. Because once you activate the colleague, then a number of amazing things happens, not just in the strategy space, but in the change space, the performance space, learning and onboarding. And I think in the past, organizations haven't been particularly good at this bottom up. It's a lot easier to go top down. And big picture, for a bit of a background, because some of you won't be familiar, it came from a sense of frustration for me about 10 years ago, when my day book was full of doodles, but I was able to engage with a wider team better than some of the, or quicker than some of the consultancies I was working with. And I increasingly got asked to sort that thing out with the wider team and come back and then tell the board or describe to the board how that team worked. And that became a bit of a specialism of mine. And what I realized I was using certain symbols and using certain approaches that these other consultancies weren't using. They were very much going top down and expecting too much of the wider team to engage. And I found it very natural to talk to them at a level, draw little doodles, which turned into then the big picture symbols. So if we are in the board, if you do want a little orientation on big pick, if you do pull out that spanner drawer, if anyone can't see it, then I will share the screen. In fact, let me do that just so you can all see what I'm looking at. These are the symbols that became big picture. So if you imagine 25 years of experience in talking to teams, I think it's really important to understand about the purpose, the team and the individuals within it, the customer. So you'll not be surprised to see that business is all about people, and that's where we start the conversation. You could jump over to the other side and talk about challenges and opportunities, but actually, in my experience, it's really good to understand the connections with technology, measures, money, and process. And actually, I would like to draw your attention to the fact there's nothing too scary there. You do not need an MBA. You do not need specialist knowledge to have that conversation. I believe that everybody in an organization has a voice and everything is connected together. And that's when the magic starts to happen. So I'm going to go through, if you've thought of that example, now I've given you a bit of an introduction to big picture and where it's come from. I suppose the last bit of that story is that we're now really clear that we solve problems in the strategy, the change, the performance, the learning and onboarding space. So if you have a particular interest, and today it's more likely to be strategy, then we will talk about strategy today, but we actually roll around those different specialisms, and we believe each of them are connected through the colleague in the way I've explained previously. So that's, I do move at pace, and I may leave you a little bit confused at times or behind. I'm always open for a chat in slower time where Bryce and I will sit down and we'll explain and go into a bit more detail. We do like this to be a bit fun, collaborative two-way, and we do move at pace. So apologies if I move at a pace that makes you uncomfortable. It's just the style of webinars that we put on to make it as interesting as we can for most people. So into the laws. If you've got an example, I'm going to spend 10 minutes now introducing you to the 3 laws of engagement. Remembering we do this because if we're going to 10x a strategy with a business, whether it's yours or a client of yours, we need to evidence the fact that we are making improvements in the right area, that we've got the right levers to pull or push. If we haven't got any analysis or any structure to that, I would be extremely uncomfortable about making that claim. But we do have the levers to pull and push, and I'm going to introduce you to them now. So I've shared a screen. We're going to come through the 3 laws. And what I'd like you to think about when you see this is not to be overwhelmed by what's on there, because it might look a bit like mumbo jumbo with some Greek lettering, etc. If you're drawing your attention to anywhere, just go for the line at the top. So the first law of engagement is about how engaged you are in the time that you have. So for that meeting or workshop that you were thinking about, the number of minutes you would say in that session, you were actually sharing what I call useful truths. So you count up those minutes and those become your business thinking minutes. So I would just like you to jot down maybe how long the meeting was or the workshop. That's your AM, your available minutes. I would like you to think about how many of those minutes were you sharing useful truths, and it directs attention to a very positive behavior that in the meetings I have now, I'm much more focused in sharing useful truths than I might have been in let's say a few years ago, maybe in more of a corporate environment where I was attending a regular meeting each week where there were maybe 15 people, but only 3 people spoke for the whole time. So it's just about the difference in how many minutes you're spending sharing useful truths and how many available minutes there are. So if you look on screen towards the middle here, we have, if you're just noting this down, I'm happily go into a bit more detail. You've got your business thinking minutes here and your available minutes here. Now you might wonder what all this is at the top, and I'm not going to go into the detail of this today. All I would say is I had to consider when putting the first law together how the group size is affected. So there's a fiddle factor, as I affectionately call it, that's only there to give some weighting to larger groups. So my statement here is if you're engaging in larger groups, then that's better than worse, because actually that's a real skill to have. If you're going into larger groups and engaging with them, that's easier to do when you're in a one-to-one, because unless you turn the chair around and look the other way, then it's probably easier to engage with one person than it is a group of 30 and 40. And I wanted these laws to work for the wider group. So this first law in summary is about how engaged you are in the time that you have. So if you've written down on your page, how many business thinking minutes, like how many useful truths were you sharing in how many minutes, how many available minutes there were, and what the size of the group was, that's good enough for me. And we'll move on to the second law. Now, the second law talks about how many good ideas are you coming up with in that time. So it's all well and good sharing useful truths, but those truths only really come alive when you have some ideas coming out. So again, I'll just draw your attention to here. We've got the ideas coming out here. Here, the ideas is I, and then we have the gems. So what are the gems? Well, the gems are the subset of the ideas that are absolute gold. These are the gems that are driving the business forward. And you'll see the fiddle factor appear again. If you're creating gems, that's incredible. And we'll show you how we do that in the big picture board. That's the bit that Bryce is going to do. In big picture terms, the gems are really the opportunities. When we put ideas onto the board, we'll be asking you to put ideas onto the board. It's the opportunity symbol with the light bulb that represents the gems. And you'll see we've brought in the engagement coefficient. So we build these laws up layer by layer. Engagement coefficient first, how well we're using our time. Second law, what's our collaboration velocity with regard to our ideas? So what I would say is, if you're writing your example down, think about how many ideas came out of that conversation you had, and how many of them are what you might call absolute gems. So which are the ones that are really going to make a difference to your business going forward? Clearly, there's a little bit of subjectivity with this. So we are doffing our cap towards laws and empirical evidence, but we're also acknowledging an element of subjectivity. And I'm fine with that, because this is what drives a good focus and a sense of behavior in an area of engagement, which is often covered by some, you know, national professional development organizations as generic top-down vague percentages. We're really getting down here as to what's happening at the coalface. And then we'll go into the third law, which is taking your collaboration velocity, and it's actually looking at how many minutes are we actually spending turning these ideas and, well, the gems into actions and outcomes. So what I'm recognizing here is gems are all well and good, but you can have a great meeting, you can be really engaged, you can generate lots of ideas, you can generate a load of gems, and your engagement coefficient will be really high and your collaboration velocity will be high. But if you do nothing about them when you come out of that meeting, then you're not creating business action minutes, you're not creating the outcomes that are the real sense of productivity for me and the outcomes. So we're going all the way through from engagement, collaboration, and to productivity. And those are the three laws, and I'm going to stop sharing there because I feel like I rambled right through them, and there's a lot of content. I normally spend an hour doing them. What I would take in the time, in the 2 minutes, because we said we'd run this to 20 past, I think, Bryce, is if anyone's got a good example or a bad example that has made sense for them in terms of talking through, just some brief numbers, it would just be a different voice. And it would be really interesting. If anyone's written some numbers down, is anyone willing to share that just with the group for a couple of minutes as to the experience that they've remembered through going through the laws?
Well, I went to a webinar today, and there was 48 people on it.
I've got my pen.
And it was 48 people on it. And getting the good bits came halfway through the meeting.
Interesting.
Two gems came up halfway through.
Interesting. So actually that might limit, Bill, the amount of business thinking minutes that only started happening when you hit halfway point. So immediately you're reducing the number of available business thinking minutes because some other stuff was happening up front, and therefore the behavior that might encourage would be to really look at the agenda to see how you could drag that forward a little bit.
And out of that, 2 ideas came out, 2 gems, and the 2 outcomes are, I have to go and do this work today. So that was brilliant.
That sounds like an immediate effect. So that scored on the business action minutes, it sounds like, and making sure you're in this session is great, because it sounds like you might have some business action minutes to do today, which would then be an action and an outcome, a productivity score. So you'll get a different profile on each of the laws. So thanks for sharing, Bill. I'm inclined, I mean, I do a whole hour on this. I could have so much fun with it, but I think it's only fair. We're here to do the 10x on strategy. And Bryce, these laws are going to underpin this drive towards, well, how do we apply this in the strategy space? So without further ado, if there's no other questions or anything you want to know from me, Bryce, I'll hand over to you to take us through the strategy side.
Martin, and thanks for the overview. And hi, Hilary. I hadn't seen you there before, but welcome to the party. I guess the interesting issue for all of us is, how do we get people engaged? And the last figures I saw for the UK were that only 45% of people are engaged. In other words, that those are the people that want to come to work, or I guess today go into the room where they are working from at home, rather than stay in the kitchen or the bedroom. So engagement is actually a crucial thing, and it's an area that I think most organizations are challenged by. And so I think what Martin has taken us through is just an indication that we have to find a way to make our meetings more effective, that we need to make it possible for people to come up with creative ideas without seeing these as career limiting proposals. And I think we all know the language of the elephant in the room, the things that no one wants to talk about. We all know the challenges of the fact that often your status determines whether or not your idea is recognized as useful or not. And there's a whole school of study, and we don't have time to touch on it in great detail, called appreciative inquiry. And appreciative inquiry is very allied to what Martin's been talking about to us. And that is that what we do is we look in any situation and say, what's working here and how do we get more of it? And the key thing is that we have to find ways of mobilizing people's personal intellectual property in the interests of the organization. So what we're trying to do this evening is not really to do a strategy exercise, because if we were, we would have a strategy board set up, and it might have any number of things on it, including language like SWOT and PESTLE and all those other things that are designed to depress us all considerably when we sit around and talk about strategy. But I just want to quickly just preamble strategy by saying I've got a whole bookshelf here, at least half my bookshelf here is full of books on strategy. And as someone said, if strategy is so many different things, is it anything at all? So I'm going to actually say what I think strategy is, just very quickly. An organization has values, and those translate into a vision, which is something that we might never accomplish, but that actually is something that mobilizes people and makes them want to go forward. We translate that into a mission, which is something we're going to do, but it might take a while. And then we go from the mission down to objectives, and those are the things that make the mission more manageable. There's a story about how do you eat an elephant, one of those riddles, and people think about it too hard. The simple answer is you can only eat an elephant one mouthful at a time. So when we talk about mission, we have to take it down to bite-sized chunks, which is our objectives. And then when we get to objectives, we have to talk about how are we going to do it. So strategy, and we can dress it up any way we like, and any consultant can dress it up for you in much fancier language. Strategy is, how are we going to do it? We know what we want to do. We know why we want to do it, going back to Simon Sinek and his book on why we want to do things. So strategy is, how are we going to do it? And that means we have to have all our people on board. They have to identify with our values and our vision, because if they don't, then they won't be engaged. And part of the problem is that vision and mission often end up just being words on the wall, and no one really owns them. They have to come from someone's heart, and we have to make sure of that. So what we're trying to do this evening is just talk about those things that in your experience would make people more committed, more involved, more wanting to take the organization forward. And we're not doing strategy per se. We're saying, if we were doing strategy here tonight, what would we do to get the people on the board and committed to the way forward? So Martin, that's really the sort of preamble to strategy. And I'm hoping now that some of the people present have got some thoughts on what they would do if you were trying to get your people to buy into the strategy or any other key aspect of your business going forward. What kind of initiatives do you think could work? And would they be discipline specific? In other words, are there things, Huel, for example, in the area of finance that might get people more committed. There's a whole school of technique called open book management, which says that all the financial figures of the firm are shared with everybody. And does that, in fact, make people more committed to what we're doing? And there are other techniques in other areas of the organization that might enhance engagement. So what I'm asking everyone to do now, within their own field and their own experience, to think of something that they could put on the board, linked to their name, that they believe, if communicated to a team, and let's look at ourselves as a team working together here this evening, that if you communicated it to us, it might make us more excited, more interested, more committed, and more prepared to take things forward. So that's what I just wanted to preamble things with. And now, if anyone wants to add anything, Martin, do you want to qualify or add anything?
Yeah,
anyone else got any comments?
Yeah, well, I'll start, Brad, because, you know, I come on these sessions with a couple of at least 2 or 3 hats on, but my contribution hat has just fired because you've said about I've just added my idea to management, which is show colleagues where their pay comes from. So if you want to increase engagement in any activity, does that provide them with an impetus? If they are driven by money and reward, then they get paid out of the company bank account. Do a little bit of analysis on where that money comes from. That might fire off something for Hugh, because I know it's something we've discussed and might actually feature in our offer. I don't want to get too into detail on that, but I think it's an example, as you were talking, that was a connection that I made. And so I went into management. I added a money symbol next to my name, and I put an opportunity to say, show a colleague where their pay comes from. Doesn't have to be flowery or fancy language. It's just a connection I came up with. And I'm interested in what other connections other people come up with, maybe in different parts of the organization, in which case, drag on an opportunity symbol and put it next to your name or somewhere where you think it's relevant. Has anybody else got a connection or an idea, there's that word, as to how we might achieve Bryce's goal of engaging people in strategy?
Can I ask you to share the board again, if you wouldn't mind, because then people can see exactly where you are on the board. And yeah. Martin is sitting in the middle of the board towards the bottom, management at the bottom of this board instead of at the top, which is a welcome change.
Yeah, so, indeed. So and I've just zoomed in there. So what I've done, this is the way and you can see it's a bit messy sometimes. You have to tidy up your spelling. Just to give an example, I know Hugh's here because I know in the kind of way Hugh operates, and that doesn't surprise me. So I've come and joined him down here. And based on that connection that I made when Bryce was talking, this is about showing colleague where the pay's come from. So it's something to do with money. And it might actually, this is the way I encourage people to think, that could be a little process to go through, which might be a little meeting or workshop in itself. Now, because Hugh's next to me here and Dion is here, this is probably suggesting to me that maybe a chat with them, they might have a stake in this connection as well. So Hugh, does that fire off something for you when I talk about that?
Well, it was very similar to what I was going to be saying anyway. I mean, on the right-hand side there, I put down opportunities and challenges, and that is basically the management having the challenge of how they're going to engage the employees, and money was going to be my answer. And so you've just done what I was going to be doing.
Now that hopefully, Hugh, if we didn't know each other a little bit through the work that we're doing, like we might come together on that. There might be somebody in a company, an organization who has a similar connection who you may not have met before. So this typically happens in an onboarding or an environment where people, colleagues from different parts of the organization come together. It just so happens we almost preempted that, but I only went with what Bryce said. I'm really interested, Dion, from your perspective, from the position here in the sales, kind of just going to budge that to the side. From a sales perspective, does that have it? I know it's just from proximity perspective, but does anything fired for you in terms of engaging people more closely in strategy?
Well, I think personally, just I think I've misplaced myself there, unfortunately. But yes, I do feel the examples that you set out definitely. But I think it's also another thing we could look at is the intrinsic value that everybody's going to be adding to the board would also be a proper suggestion. You know, where do you fit into the board? And like I said, those processes. But I think to me, a big thing is like the involvement from the word go, that you don't grab the person, you know, right at the end.
Yeah. So that's why I think that icebreaker to bring the colleagues in, and another type of version of that is that to get people involved, I might say to you, go into the resource drawer and bring on the symbol that makes more sense to you, like what makes you tick, i.e. what's the symbol that you have most affinity with. So I'm going to play along. I'm going to say, actually, for me, it's about measuring, because for me, is if I can't measure something, then I actually don't know what good looks like. So that might be another way to do it. But yeah. Bryce, we want, there's a few ideas already on the board, aren't there? So I don't know if we want to kind of pick up on a few of them or encourage people to add a few more.
I'm just wondering, and I'm having to peer because my big screen's not working for me this evening, but I'm just wondering whether, Inge, you've put yourself on the board and you've also put an opportunity symbol next to yourself. Can you see, are you operations focused, or are you thinking generally about something that might get people more engaged in the process? Sorry, are you there, Inge?
Sorry, I was just reorganizing myself. I'm very much operational focused, and I actually did type in my opportunity trying to elaborate exactly what it is, but I'm not seeming to get that onto the dashboard there.
Talk us through it.
Okay, so what I was looking at is trying to create or to break down the silos that we currently have in our operational structures, in order to just identify to the teams how their collaboration could obviously be working towards more process efficiencies. So yeah, so that's why these two would interlink for me.
So what you're saying is, if we got the team involved, and it links back in a way to the money, I think in many cases, when people look at organizations, they don't realize at the end of the day that any waste, any expense that's not necessary to run the business and take it forward is actually reducing the potential of the organization to pay them, or anyone else for that matter. So if we can get people to see that the processes need to have less waste in them, and if we can get them to see that that has a real financial impact on what money is available to share with them, then I think that kind of linkage would also be quite powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other thoughts? Other people that would like to add something to the picture?
Yeah, Bryce, if I can, you know, if you look there next to my name, I typed in a couple of things: CX and EX, customer experience and employee experience. It link up with Martin. I mean, if there's no customer experience, obviously there's going to be no money. And I mean, there's quite a big link. You need to sort out the CX first before you sort out the EX. And then also the 5 I's of engagement. I mean, it also ties in quite nicely: inform, involve, inspire, instruct, and incentivize. I mean, so those are, I mean, you can put them wherever you want on the board, but I mean, if you apply those 5 principles that inform, is people want to be informed these days. They don't want to be, the mushroom principle or the mushroom strategy is no longer applicable. People don't want to be kept in the dark. They definitely want to be informed, not in detail. I mean, I had a long discussion the other day with the finance guy. I mean, you don't have to open the books to them, but at least a very important point that Martin showed to them is, where do the money come from? What is their contribution in the big picture? And then also, I mean, involve. I mean, let them feel part of the team. I mean, show them that their contribution count. And I mean, not just. I mean, you see a lot of managers and supervisors say, okay, listen, I'm going to allow people to talk, but at the end of the day, I mean, you hear, but you don't listen, you know. And also inspire, instruct, incentivize. So I don't want to hog it, but if you apply those 5 principles across the spectrum. I mean, it's actually you cover the whole, I mean, the whole engagement scenario, you know.
I mean, essentially what we're saying is, if we take some of the thoughts that are coming from Sholem and link them back to Inge's point about, you know, the process and sharing with people what is happening, it can just be things like the reduction in waste, the reduction in spoilage, or whatever it is that we measure our unnecessary losses to. It takes us all the way back then to Martin's point about finance and Huel's point. If we can just show people that there's a very direct impact of waste, and I'll just give you a very brief example. I do a lot of work in government, and I go around hospitals in particular in this country, and it depresses me no end, because I go into the ablution facilities and there's taps and water running that no one shows any interest in. They're not concerned. It's just literally hundreds and thousands of liters of water a day that are just going to waste because no one owns the problem. And of course, in our system, it's more complicated because they have to put in a motivation to another government department to come and sort it out. But no one would think to actually just go and turn the stopcock off, or to change the washer, or to do something to save the water because it's not their problem. So I think that kind of thinking is what we want to get away from. And if we can get that happening in a business, and everyone sees that waste costs all of us something, the operations people, the finance people, then we are informing them and making it possible for them to make a useful contribution going forward.
To add there, Bryce, I mean, it's a very fine line, because at the end of the day is you can lose people, or you can actually get them on board. If you actually give them too much information that don't apply to them, you will lose them. So you're absolutely 100% correct. You need to apply. You need to actually speak to their needs and their wants and their influence, their sphere of influence. It'll serve no purpose telling a person, listen, we need to sort out the international market, an operator on the floor. We need to get more share in the international market. He's got no influence there. But what you can tell him and say, listen, if we produce crap, sorry my word, rubbish, I mean, because we compete in the international market. If we produce rubbish, we will never be able to get a foothold in the international market. So you, as a line operator, as a process operator, your influence or your involvement, okay, is to make sure that all the product coming off the production line is absolutely A+ quality, so that we can actually compete on a level footing, where with regards to quality, with the rest of the of our competitors in the market.
Yeah.
So that's also a very important point.
Another engagement lesson is give people something to engage with that is under their control.
Absolutely.
And often when we look at challenges in an organization and we identify things to do going forward, how we're going to do things, we often identify what are called low fruits, where people can make an input in a very short space of time, like the water that I talk about. If someone just went and changed the tap or turned the stopcock off, they could save thousands of liters a day without any approval, budget, or anything else. So we need to have it within people's range of control.
Yeah. So what I'm going to suggest, Bryce, is I think looking at the clock and this being an end-to-end demonstration back to the 10X, I think we've had an insight there into the first law of, are we, if we extended that time with the team sharing useful truths, I would say we are, and we're giving people a basis and a board to do that. And then the question becomes the second law, which is, how are we generating ideas? And I think this is where the accelerant and the contagion comes in, because you'll see I flicked up onto this right-hand side. So this is where we have a story to tell. And this is an insight I want to give you, because you can use this digital kit next week. You've all now got a dashboard to go into and create your own board. If you want to speed up the generation of ideas in the strategy space specifically, but it could be your own agenda, you'll see that this opportunities drawer on the right-hand side that you've all got access to has now pre-populated with the ideas. And you can see, because we're playing around and it's just an insight, we've promoted some of these ideas to the top and called them gems. Now, what I'm going to suggest to you, if you're okay with this, Bryce, because it's just a demonstration, right? Could we ask people as a free-for-all to start ordering those opportunities up and down that list? And you do that using the 8 gray buttons. And I'm not going to give any order to it or any special dibs for anyone in the room. I'm going to ask you to all promote one of those ideas to the top or the bottom as you see fit. And I'm just going to give that a minute to settle. So please knock yourself out moving opportunities up and down that list using those 8 gray tabs. And I'm just going to delete the opportunity one because it's just getting in the way a little bit. So please just go ahead. The thing here is that we're now talking about the promotion of ideas into gems using the opportunity symbol within Big Pick. So these are transferable laws that work in any approach. And I can see some movement towards the bottom of that. No one's actually going nuts and promoting it all of the way to the top, but please do. I can see some movement now. Clearly, we would facilitate this through and we would promote. Look at that movement. I love this because this is the way we facilitate and we parallel process. Bryce, I don't know whether you've seen any themes there or people just mucking about, which is great. If you spot a theme, maybe you could just riff around why one is going to the top and others are going to the bottom.
Look, I think basically people are taking ideas and just, we haven't got time to go through it, but in the ideal world, we would take ideas, discuss them, and then say, is that idea worth taking forward as a gem? And we did put a little notation on the top right of the screen about what a gem was. It's something that everyone feels is a great idea. And then we would move the gems to the top. So if you look on the chart, we have a gem moving up. Let's do X, Y, Z in discussion with the team. Someone's just moving that up the board. But we could end up with gems at the top. Those are things that everyone felt committed to, ideas that were a little lower down. And then ultimately, with time, we could take those gems and turn them into an opportunity. So I think the ideas that seem to be percolating to the top are essentially ones that involve further communication around why things are happening, further communication and discussion within the team. So it's very team focused at this stage, which is appropriate because we want to get the team all on the same page.
Yeah.
Martin, is it possible, sorry for me to interrupt, is it possible to make the font maybe a bit smaller so that we can see, because mine is cut off. I can't see the last sentence.
Yeah,
just idea.
A little bit. No, it's because what I would encourage on this, Shalom, is a shorter descriptor on the opportunity, and then put the detail into here. So they should have shorter tags. It's designed that way so that the thing has shorter tags so that you can see them all in one line, and then you put the detail into the actual the body of it. So the tags are a bit long. So we do a bit of refining and tidying on that. I mean, the actual content, given this is an insight, if we were spending time on this, there'd be in the breaks, etc. We'd be tidying them up. We might even lose the tags at the front. So it's a demonstration of the second law. Well, the first law initially, in the fact we've had 5, 10, 15 minutes of a damn good chat of talking about different aspects. We then spent some time, 5 minutes or so, using the opportunities draw to shift stuff up and down, and obviously the content, today's strategy, and therefore we would spend a bit longer doing that. And then, of course, the last thing, Bryce, is the fact that we would turn that into action, wouldn't we? So that would always come after the meeting. So just like Bill has now been given those actions to do this afternoon to create an outcome, we would then take a PDF of this and export it, and we'd have this action list, which we would then take action off through ownership. And that's where the narrative and the voice around comes in, because the board itself won't give us that. That's about behavior in and around the board. But what I would say is the experience we've had by all being part of this, and a bit like a holiday snap, we would all have our kind of picture taken or our name on it. In fact, you can see who's been doing what, because we've got all our activity in this right-hand side of the board. We've all been a part of an experience that means we feel more accountable for this. So therefore, by going through this process, taking your 5 eyes, Sholly, I would like to think we have informed and involved and inspired and instructed, maybe a bit less on the latter ones, but certainly involved, because we've given everyone a chance. At no point have I said, please, only the highest paid person in the room give us their view. I'm actually not interested. I'm more interested in the views of colleagues. And then it's the ability of the thought leaders and the managers to take that forward in something. That's where the organism versus the organisation comes in. Is that a fair observation, Bryce? Do you think? I'm aware of time, so
yeah.
bring it
And
back.
what I would add, Martin, I think we know, all of us, because we're all in the world of dealing with people, is that we get commitment through involvement. And so if nothing else, this process, having got people engaged, having got them making contributions, recognizing them all, irrespective of where they sit in the organization, that involvement leads to commitment. We can't, as Sholem said earlier on, we can't impose commitment on people. People commit because they believe in what we're doing. So I think we can take your laws, we can identify the ideas, we can rank them, we can prioritize them. And coming out of this process, what we would find is there would be a much greater commitment to delivering on those opportunities that we identified collectively. And even in a small group like this, in an ideal world, we would do this over a much longer time, and people would have had a much more opportunity. We would have brought in people like June and Alex and Richard and people that Jess and Hillary that didn't really get a chance to engage in discussion. But over a longer period of time, we would bring everyone to the party, hopefully.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Bryce. And just to tie up a summary, just to get my last note out, I noticed earlier what I've learned from this session is that we majored on team and opportunity, but partly due to the voiceover, we talked about money because of maybe the motivations. And I did make a disclaimer on that. Not everybody is driven by money, but we got talking about it, process and measure. And that's interesting for me because the primary symbols were team and opportunity, but we kept talking about process, measure, and money. And that's interesting as well. And it's about how you bring those in. Like Bill said earlier, you can wait till the end to do that, or you can throw them in at the beginning and say, guys, which measure is important for you? So I would like to think that promotes one of the second laws, which is about how you focus ideas. So I think from a practical perspective, I mean, firstly, Bryce, thank you for you're putting in your strategy insights into the laws. We're giving them a good old flex and a good old practice because they stand up and they represent really positive behaviors, and we're going to use them to track progress when we're working with clients against that 10x claim, so we can put as many sessions and conversations in there with some subjectivity but shine a light on positive behaviors. From a practical perspective, you are now, if you're in the digital kit board, you can continue to use that. You can create a board of your own. You can share that with one other person. If you want a trial that opens it out to your team, just let me know. There's an account settings bit which explains how the thing works. I need to remind you, because I feel it's the right thing to do, Big Picture is a physical product. These poker chips and things on my desk are about us working at our desk on our wall. That board behind me is a Big Picture board, as Bryce has got. Fact is, we can't do that. So the digital kit is where we're at. And today's been about 10x in strategy and how we apply all that amazing knowledge in those books behind Bryce, funneled through Bryce Vision with a bit of big picture on the side to make sure that when we do engage with you and your teams around strategy, we can create those accelerants and those contagions. So we're on time. So I kind of say at this point, that's the end of the official session, but we're open for any stories. We love stories. So there is now no agenda. It's if you need to drop off, just drop a thing in chat or disappear. Have a great weekend. Who's got a story?
I'm going to get my chair to start with.
Bryce needs to sit down. Anybody who hasn't spoken who